This is Environmental Science 1, Chapter 2, Part 2, Living Things in Ecosystems. In this portion of the video lecture, we will be talking about how species interact with each other. So we'll be talking about community relationships in the ecosystem. We can take all organisms in the ecosystem and place them into two general categories. A consumer is an individual or a population that uses a particular resource. In other words, these animals will consume or eat something in order to get their energy. Producers, on the other hand, these are organisms that make their own food, either by sunlight through photosynthesis or by chemical means. For example, some bacteria that live deep down in the ocean where there is no sunlight, by hydrothermal vents, they do chemosynthesis. So they put together different chemicals in their environment and rearrange them to make a food source. Much like through photosynthesis, a tree will rearrange the elements in water and carbon dioxide in order to make glucose. Discussing the common types of community relationships in the ecosystem, a very common scenario in most of nature is predation. So predator-prey relationships. These are definitely a win-lose situation. The winner being the predator, who is the organism that kills and eats the other organism, and of course the loser being the prey organism, which is the organism that's being removed from the population. In other words, it got eaten. Taking a look at how consumers consume, there's a couple of different ways we can do that. The herbivores are those organisms that consume only plant material. And the carnivores, of course, are those consumers that only eat meat products, exclusively meat. If you eat both meat and plant material, then you are an omnivore. Some animals are not as nice as some of the nature specials may have them look. Some predator and prey are actually the same species. When they are, that is known as cannibalism. That does happen quite often in nature. In the cases of most cannibalism, it's between parents, believe it or not, parents and offspring. So parents will eat their offspring in some cases, or other organisms in the population will come in and pick off the weak and the sick of their own species as well. Predation influences the organization of communities. There can't be too many predators for not enough prey organisms, because then the predators will suffer and starve and die. So there has to be way more prey species in an area than there are predators. When we talk about how animals change over time and evolve, natural selection plays a huge force for adaptations and what's called predator-prey coevolution. Coevolution is when one species evolves in response to another. Sometimes it's called the coevolutionary arms race, much like the nuclear arms race of the 1980s between the US and Russia. We stock up our nuclear weapons, Russia does the same. We retaliate by stocking up more, and it's everybody's changing, but there's always this kind of stalemate situation. So coevolution is when one animal evolves in response to another. Or in some cases, one plant may evolve in response to an animal, or vice versa. Competition out in nature. Everything everywhere is competing for resources. So competition is any use or defense of a resource by one individual that reduces the availability of that resource to others. And there's different types of competition. depending on the types of resources involved and who is involved in that competition. Competition between the same species is referred to as intra-specific competition. For example, the two animals that I have there on the left side are more than likely going to have to compete for similar food resources. They may have to compete for the same pool of mates. They may have to compete for a shelter in their habitat. So as long as they are the same species, that is intra-specific competition. Now, interspecific competition is competition between two different species. Usually, interspecific competition is for food resources and perhaps territory or space. So as long as they're different species competing for the same resource, that's interspecific competition. So here we have an example of intraspecific. We have the two Bengal tigers violently fighting over something. My bet is a food source. And interspecific competition. Here we have water resource. We have the trout being a resource of food for both the eagle and the bear. So they are competing against each other for the same food resource. So competition really determines who can coexist or live together within a habitat. Successful competition doesn't always mean that one species is going to, or one population is going to die off. Competition exists all the time in nature. Sometimes it's successful and other times it isn't. But competition is always for resources. And we have kind of the big four of the quest for food and water, the quest for space and shelter, and of course the quest for mates. So competition, either intra or inter-specific competition, will be for those four resources. So this can happen in a couple of different ways. A very common type of competition is what's called exploitation competition. If you're exploiting something, you are exposing it for your own gain. So exploitation competition is where one species is capturing resources faster than its competitor. A good example of the old exploitation competition is squirrels gathering nuts in the fall. The squirrel that gathers the most nuts has the best stash for winter. So they all compete with each other to get as many of those resources as they can. Interference competition is when two species or two organisms will interfere with each other to exclude the other from its habitat. A lot of times this is a sort of a bluffing sort of situation. The elephant seal, there is only one male, the beachmaster, that is allowed to mate with any of the female elephant seals. However, there are other males in the population. They absolutely try to mate with some of the females, but the beachmaster will make a lot of noise and chase them away from all of the ladies. So they will interfere with the lesser males, getting in the way of his mating rights. Overgrowth competition often happens with plants. This is where one individual grows upon another, depriving that individual of resources, usually sunlight, maybe water, maybe soil resources. Here we have some barnacles. Barnacles are living organisms, and they will grow and compete one on top of the other. So he who is on top gets the best types of resources, and if you get buried, then you lose. Territorial competition is very common, especially in wildlife of the mammal variety. So this is where one individual or several, if they work in a pack or a herd, defends their own space. So the territory, depending on the range of that, it can be large or small. but the individuals will fight for their own space. Chemical competition is also amongst the plant kingdom. This is where some plants, through their roots or due to some types of seeds or berries, may produce a toxin that acts at a distance for other plants. And so no other plants or shrubs can grow around the plant that's undergoing the chemical competition. So that way, that's how plants kind of fight for their own space and their own resources. And finally, the last type of competition is only done absolutely when it has to be, and we call that encounter competition. This is where we're gonna get some physical harm. This is where a fighting, okay, an encounter competition. Two competitors will be involved in physical harm over the same resource. Animals will not do this unless they absolutely have to. They will bluff. They will make a lot of noise. They will make themselves look bigger. They will do anything possible to not get involved in an actual fight. Because if animals are involved in an encounter competition and become injured, they may not be able to survive the long haul. There are no emergency rooms out in the wilderness for animals to go in and check into. So they will only do an encounter competition. They will only physically fight when they absolutely have to. Parasitism is another type of relationship in nature. Parasites, it's a little bit different than predation because a parasite is an organism that either lives in or on another organism and steals its nutrients, usually without the host even knowing it. So the survival of parasites does depend on their host surviving rather than dying. So parasites kind of give their host a slow, drawn-out death as opposed to a kill right away. Ticks are a great example of parasites. The host organism, that's the one that usually, again, does not know it's being preyed upon by a parasite. So the host organism is where the parasite takes its nourishment from. Commensalism. This is kind of referring to a relationship, like I like to say it's kind of a mooching relationship. One species benefits and the other isn't helped in the process, but it's not hurt either. If you think about, for example, a butterfly hitching a ride on your shoulder as you're walking down the street. You don't know the butterfly's there. It's certainly not adding any weight to your walk. But the butterfly gets a free ride, so it doesn't need to expend energy. So it's kind of a win-neutral situation. The commensalistic organism may depend on that host for maybe some food or shelter, support, or transport. And again, the other organism isn't getting anything out of it, but it's not harmed in the process either. Mutualism. This is a relationship where both organisms benefit. So they're both getting a win-win situation. They both get something out of the relationship. So one or both individuals may gain food or protection from enemies or a nesting site, but they're both getting a positive benefit from their relationship. This has been Chapter 2, Living Things in Ecosystems, Part 2 for Environmental Science 1.